before they do it. It's still, the whole AI for networks versus networks for AI, that whole thing.
What is that?
AI for networks is...
And the on-RAN and the and-RAN and the with-RAN and all that.
Right, okay. AI for networks means using AI to help manage, plan, build, maintain the network. That's the stuff I look at.
Yeah,
which feels to me like an incremental step up from automation in the
Correct.
past.
It's part of the same.
Yeah,
it's part of the same thing. Networks for AI is what kind of things do we need to do to the network to support AI services?
Right.
The stuff that Brian Washburn's been doing with understanding the traffic flows and how those are going to change.
Right.
That's networks for AI.
And there was one interesting actually from those keynotes that they said there's quite a lot of traffic already is AI to AI. Like it doesn't involve human beings at all.
Oh yeah. Oh they're hoping that the agent to agent stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be, but.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. It's just me and Ian today, but we might have a surprise visitor, but I'm not going to say who in case they don't make it.
Yeah.
And if that happens, we'll just cut and we'll do a reshuffle.
It's the first time someone's come in partway through.
Just barged in, yeah.
We had someone virtually come in. But...
Yes, we did have that. That was remember we had a geezer on Zoom.
Yes, from Vodafone.
That's right.
Paco.
So what have we been up to? What was the last pod? Oh yeah, that was with Phil from HP. I thought that was great fun. I thought Phil was really good company.
Yep.
And for some reason, I don't know, we were just especially gobby and tangential, which I always enjoy. I'll let our audience decide whether or not. There'll probably be some group of them where like, can you just get the fuck on with it?
Not sure about the Fosters.
The Fosters, yeah, the Fosters.
The one dent.
I think Phil was aware of that, and so he raised his game to make up for the Fosters. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. And since then, we have been up to stuff. One of the things we've been up to, we're going to chat about as our main segment. But we should give a little shout out to Ben and Hazel from Huawei, who took us out to Brewdog, and we had Hazy Jane and 5 different types of wings.
How is it on tap, by the way? Is it any different?
It's pretty similar. I mean, other people, our colleague Teresa joined us. Other people were having other ones, and in the end, everyone just went, fuck it, we'll have Hazy Jane's.
The nice thing about it on tap is it comes in pints.
Yeah. There's that.
I think it tastes nice, but the fact it's less bubbly, I think
it is a bit less bubbly.
Is in its favour.
Yeah, I thought it was really good.
So it helps on the pod, so we're not doing great big rude burps.
Is it even less bubbly than when it's poured then?
I guess so, but it didn't feel flat. It wasn't like offensively flat, was it?
It was very nice. It was going down a little bit too
Going down
easily.
far too well. Yeah, we had quite a few. I was fucking knackered yesterday.
I mean, it's quite a strong beer. That's the trouble. It's not really a session pint.
Yeah, I mean, we were good. We didn't do things like we were kicking ourselves after we went out. After Phil, Alistair, who was in the room while we were recording, he joined us for a bit. He's a good laugh. Hi, Alistair, if you're listening. Thanks a lot for that. And he bought us a few beers. And then Paul from Babel, who they also manage HPE as their PR agency, he came along and bought us some beers. And then they all cleared off, and we went, should we go and have a bite to eat? And for some reason, we shared a bottle of red.
Yeah,
and I think that ensured that we were going to feel a bit cack mixing red at the end of a fairly prolonged beer session. So you live and learn. So I think that's one of the reasons I was less hungover yesterday is we just stuck to the Hazy Janes. But for some reason, sometimes when you go to bed pissed, even if you've done what I always do, which is have a pint of water and a bite to eat, don't just collapse straight into bed as soon as you get home. Sometimes, because of the alcohol in your system, your whole metabolism's all fucked up and you get hot and you wake up and anyway, I just woke up like 6 a.m. or something, having finally nodded off about 2. And that was it. I was just so knackered all day. But anyway, I had about 9 or 10 hours kip last night to wake up for it. So now I'm back in the game.
And you need to be.
I need to be, yeah, because what we're going to...
unusually smart.
Well, I'm looking smart, and Ian seems to have been showing solidarity. Although we've got different button strategies, I can see. You're a 1 button, and I'm a 2 button. Undone.
Are you going to the thing as well?
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah. So I'll say what it is, so people know what the thing is. Our colleagues from Omdia are doing a presentation on AI in telecoms, and they asked me to chair it. I think they just think maybe a journalist gobshite adds a bit of colour to the whole thing. I'll let them and the audience be the judge of that. And that's just up on the top floor of this building that we're recording from. And Ian's going to come along and heckle. So yeah. So that's why I'm looking smarter, because I figured they don't want me bowling up in a Metallica top or something. So I made the effort.
Maybe they'll be disappointed you don't bowl up in a Metallica
No, I did
top.
actually check about dress code, and it was made clear that there's a certain degree of smart cash expected of me.
Yeah.
So there we go. Anyway, so we got a hard stop before that. So I'm going to stop rabbiting and get straight into it. I'll pass the ball to you, Ian. What were we doing before we met up with Ben and Hazel on Wednesday?
We were at an event in London, in Hammersmith, called FutureNet World, I think is the full name of it.
Yeah.
That I think it's actually been running for about 9 years now. Someone
That
told
long?
me. Yeah. But I've only really been aware of it for 3 or 4.
Yeah, and this is the first time I've been to it.
Yeah, and it's organised by a guy called Giles Cummings. I don't know what his organisation's called, whether he just calls
It's very much
himself
him.
FutureNet, but it's very much his thing.
His thing, yeah.
And
And he
he's
was
done
at
a really good
Informer
job
back in
of
the
it.
day, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, he's so I was talking to a kind of guy who freelances for us sometimes, Ken Wheeland, yesterday, and he knew Giles when he worked at Informer years ago.
Right.
So back in the days of things.
Shout out to Ken.
Shout out to Ken. Back in the days of things like WiMAX Vision, which is what Ken was working on. So
WiMAX Vision.
WiMAX was like 2010 or something.
Wow, he really
It's like-
picked a winning horse there.
Yeah, but he's done a really good job with FutureNet. I think it's a really good event. I mean, it's obviously there's a lot of interest from the industry in going to it and participating because it's very service provider heavy.
It's really well attended.
Very well attended, and like just lots of operators on stage talking and. Very well represented from kind of the European.
No, fair play to
telco
Giles.
side.
He's obviously knows what he's doing. It's great speaker recruitment, great attendee levels, all the keynote rooms. I mean, they weren't the biggest, but I mean, the main keynote room seemed to fit, I'd say, 200 or 300 people.
And it was full.
And it's full.
And it's a nice venue as well, actually. I mean, those hotel venues that are, kitted out quite well and have got good facilities.
It is actually. Yeah, I've never been to that one. So it's the Novotel West, which is like
much better.
next to the Hammersmith flyover.
Yeah, much better than having something somewhere like the Excel Centre. I mean, that's just depressing.
Fuck the Excel
Centre. To go there. So
and the rooms are too big.
The rooms are too big. I mean, it's a good venue. He's done it. I know he's done at least done it there for a couple of years because it was the same place last year, and the theme's very much. I mean, I guess the theme this time around was very much kind of AI, wasn't it? It was the central theme of it, but. There was a lot of discussion about telco business models and growth and where it's all going and things that kind of tie into that might maybe spur growth for them or change that's what everybody's interested in, I suppose, at the moment, isn't it? Is whether these newfangled things like AI and APIs are actually going to change the conversation a bit.
Yeah, and I get it. I did my thing of, I quite like to, when I'm at an event, partly because I know I'm going to go out, if I know I'm going to have some beers after, I like to just get the whole thing done and dusted. Yeah. Also, while it's fresh in my mind. And so I take notes while the keynotes are going and then just take an opportunity to quickly tap it up and publish it. So I did mine pretty quickly, and my headline was, FutureNet World is haunted by the ghost of Telecoms past. Part of that is I was just... Yeah, you see what I did there? Although the Dickensian part was a bit of a force. In so much as there was nothing Dickensian about it. But what I wanted to do is make the juxtaposition between the name of the event and the fact that I felt a lot of the keynotes covered legacy as opposed to future issues. Granted, I take your point, AI, APIs, that they're future opportunities, and a lot of it is like this sort of rolling bit of industry brainstorming about how do we make use of those opportunities.
Yeah.
But I felt, and it's not a criticism of the event or any of the speakers, it's more just an observation of the industry. It just felt like once more, there was a very deja vu-ish sense to the conversations and the topics. And it was like, well, yeah, AI, that might come in handy, and we could perhaps do a bit of this and a bit of that. And it's all a bit vague. And then, APIs, that could open up new opportunities. And it's stuff that we've heard before, certainly ever since Kamara. It is Kamara, not camera, isn't it? It's Kamara.
Who's she then?
Kamara and Ericsson's Vonage buy. Ever since those things have brought the APIs and the network exposure thing to the fore, I've just felt it's been the same old conversation of like, yeah, it's gonna open up all sorts of opportunities. Like what? I mean, I don't know. You might be able to see where someone is.
Yeah, well, the things that have come out of APIs so far are not really very exciting, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Things like fraud management and, location are stuff. I'm not even sure I really think they fall into the category of network APIs anyway. They just sound like standard communications APIs to me, and the kind of stuff that people were able to do before.
Yeah.
And I think even Ericsson would concede that. If you talk to them, they'd say, yeah, we're still waiting for that. The stuff they really care about is this quality on demand side of things. The idea that you can do network slicing and have sort of guaranteed service levels for customers and attach some of these whizzier features to applications. And that's not what we've seen at the moment. What we're seeing at the moment is pretty humdrum, really.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I'm not going to jump ahead of it because this is another session that we're going to talk about that you and I were just mulling over immediately before, which is to do with Open RAN. But the broader thing they've all got in common is we have these technological initiatives.
Yeah.
And let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they look great on PowerPoint.
Yeah.
But then we're still wrestling with what of practical commercial use are we going to do with any of these new technologies?
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I'm still sort of writing something on it and trying to get my head around stuff there, and mainly sort of focusing, I suppose, on that opening session that we were both out on, the keynote on day one. And I agree with you. I think you get a lot of sort of going over themes from the past. There's a sense that you've been here and done all this before, and it feels a bit deja vu-y. But I also thought there were some quite interesting observations.
Go on.
Well, I think so. We had William Webb on a few weeks ago, and he's made a big deal of this issue of data growth slowing for a few years now, and did his original forecasts about this S-curve flattening of data traffic a long time ago. And he's
and I thought, sorry to interrupt, you might be about to get to this, but I'm pretty sure, I didn't mention it in my story, but I'm pretty sure at least one panellist sort of went, everyone pretty much accepts that data growth is slow.
Yeah, so that was one of my main takeaways, because I think I remember being at Mobile World Congress last year on the, and I don't often go to conference sessions at Mobile World Congress, I just tend to go and do interviews.
No, I never do.
But I went to one because Orin said, you must go to this one because it's the 5 CEOs of the big European telcos all on stage together. They're kind of come up with some big announcement.
Was that the one where they just begged for more public money? Kind of,
yeah. But one thing I remember from that was, there's this whole conversation about fair share. This notion that traffic growth is putting so much pressure on costs, and we need to have the internet companies contributing and all this. And I remember Crystal Haderman, who's the CEO of Orange, who wouldn't have even been in the role a huge amount of time then, using the word exponential to describe data growth on the network. And Dean Bubley, another analyst that we have on frequently,
been on plenty of
he was
times.
also at FutureNet, immediately kind of responded on X, as it is now, and said this is a falsehood. She used the word exponential. It's clearly not the case anymore. And I don't think this is only 1 year ago. I think she would probably not use the word again. She'd probably be quite hesitant. And that was the first time I think at FutureNet that I've heard more than one telco at a public forum sort of acknowledge that data growth is slowing down.
Yeah.
We kind of have suspected that's the case, and Williams' forecasts have started to look like they're right. But to actually hear network operators on stage saying, so it was the people who said it were Gabriella from BT. She's like basically head of network strategy and research.
I'd love to get her on the pod. If anyone from BT's listening, or even Gabriella herself, I think she'd make a brilliant podcast.
Yeah, she would. But she said, years ago it was at 50%, and we were seeing this huge sort of increase every year. Now we're looking more like 10%.
That's right.
Jeannie York from Virgin Media 2, she's their CTO, said a similar thing. She was like, we were at sort of 32% before, now it's kind of 10 to 15%. I think somebody else acknowledged it without sort of coming out with figures. Can't remember who it is. But
I tell you, since you mentioned those two, one observation, I didn't write it in my piece. Well, actually, I did to some extent. Where did I say? I noted that in both panels, because Gabriella and Jeannie were in different panels.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
In both panels, I found they were the most sort of hyper-realistic.
Yeah.
They're the ones who were least inclined to go along with the hype, were least inclined to be utopian, and all that sort of thing. And it could just be a coincidence that they were the only two women on each panel, but I thought it was interesting.
The one who was most hypey, and this is why I thought there's a bit of a contradiction going on at the moment, and some sort of mixed messages from the industry. And I think we're going to talk about this 6 gigahertz thing later.
Yeah, we are.
But this sense that the industry's under all this pressure and they need help, they need more resources, they need the internet players to cough up. Now they're starting to acknowledge that data traffic growth is slowing down. But one of the other themes of the morning session, and the person I think who was a bit more on the kind of maybe the other side of the argument, perhaps from Gabriella and Jeannie York, was Bruno Zabib, who I like a lot, and I think he's got some really good ideas about things. But he came up with this idea about all you can eat data. All you can eat tariffs being dead, and it's like we're going to be moving away from that. I remember Jeremy Leggs, the CTO of AT&T, saying a similar thing at DTW last year. This idea that we're now in a world where we need to start looking at different ways of charging for things, and obviously all you can eat pricing has not been a great thing in a world of ubiquitous connectivity where everybody just basically pays a flat fee. It kind of kills your opportunity for data growth. But
to be slightly pedantic, we don't quite have all you can eat in mobile. We have tiers.
Yeah, we have tiers, but it's pretty much all you can eat, isn't it? They don't make any
certainly what I get
revenue.
now. I pay 60 quid a month.
Mine is all you can eat.
Right, yours is all you can eat, but I pay mine might as well be because I never use it. I pay 60 quid a month for about 120 gig of data, and I farm that out to the rest of my family through gifting. Yeah. And between the four of us, we can't use it up.
The offer I've had at the moment, if I want to go SIM only, because I'm just out of contract now, is like 28 quid a month to be on the same deal I'm on, which is unlimited anything.
Right.
And like low roaming in Europe.
So then my quibble is less and less pertinent because we're effectively on all you can eat.
Yeah. And I just thought, what an interesting time to start talking about introducing pricing that's based on usage at the moment when we're talking about data traffic growth slowing down. It's like, imagine it like the restaurant comparison. Some guy opens a restaurant and like has a buffet lunch for $10, and everybody piles in and they're loading up their plates and eating, and he's complaining about margins.
Someone goes, "You've had too many sausage rolls."
And then all of a sudden, everybody starts to go, "Oh, well, they're a bit full," and it slows down, and business isn't quite as good. And then he starts talking about charging per item. It's like there's a real mismatch going on here. I talked to Dean about this. He's like, "You've got the supply situation sorted out." And William would say this as well. He said, "There's no real need now for heavy spending on network improvements." Yeah, the stuff that's out there is able to do what they need it to do. And these like huge investments that went on in the past in hardware, in capacity, that's kind of done, yeah? The telcos themselves are saying, we want software-based 6G. We want it to be a slight incremental thing. We don't want to have a whole hardware refresh. So the message is that there's sufficient capacity, but there's a drop off in demand because people aren't traffic's not growing as much as it used to. Now we want to start charging per item rather than doing on a all you can eat basis.
Yeah, obviously I agree with you.
The time to do is past, because if they let's say you could do what someone like Jeremy Legg was suggesting, like start charging by the gigabyte and everything, rather than doing it the way that it has been done. If consumption's not growing, you're not going to make any more money anyway.
Yeah, you could argue that the last opportunity to do that was the window was closed when fixed line became unlimited. Do you remember there was once a time where you would have some kind of cap on the amount of data you got through broadband?
Yeah.
And they'd be cheaper.
I do remember that.
You could go for an unlimited one, or you could get a cheaper one where it's just broadband. Anyway, that turned out to be bollocks, and now no one does that anymore, do they?
No. I'm being a little bit unkind to Bruno here.
But hear me out with this. And I think that set a precedent. The main thing I'm skirting around is culture and consumer expectations.
Yeah.
So that set a consumer expectation that data will be unmetered on the fixed line side. And I think it's reasonable to assume that in terms of consumer expectation, that would have had effect on mobile.
Yeah.
And that will be one of the reasons why companies have gravitated that way. And then the only other thing I want to say about culture is, culture's like a super tanker, isn't it? It's very hard to influence. You can look back over 50 years and see that culture's changed. And then you can see occasional attempts to change culture more abruptly, like some of the stuff Trump's coming out with by trying to ban people having DEI programs or something like That seems to be an attempt to sort of brute force change culture. But generally, it's very hard to change culture. And I just think, I certainly don't think for consumers, and that's the one pushback I'll give. I suspect that when people like Bruno Zabib and the chap from AT&T are talking about more bespoke pricing, it must be on a B2B sort of premium service basis. Because I can't see how any of the three of us would ever would find it at all easy to change from the buying habits for mobile. That
I don't
think
think he's talking necessarily B2B, but I don't think what he means is. So I'm being a bit unfair, but he did sort of invite this by saying it's an end of all you can eat pricing, because the immediate reaction to that is, oh, you mean you're going to stop charging
metered or
what I think he's getting at
services.
is this idea of, and this gets us back to the APIs discussion in a way, but what he's talking about really is this idea of selling differentiated services. Not just this sort of one size fits everybody. Here's your kind of mobile service. That's what we provide, and go off and use it. He's sort of pushing the idea that you use network slicing is the technology that would support this, but you kind of provide lots of differentiated types of service. So a broadcast company might want a low latency connection, for instance, to do like 5G video or something, and a gamer might have an interest in the same kind of thing, and if you can carve out these slices and attach guarantees to them, then people will pay different levels for these kind of differentiated services. That was the kind of idea that he was pushing. But
and how do you feel about that as an idea?
I mean, the problem I've got, I think, increasingly with network slicing, and this really ties in with the API stuff, because the APIs is sort of the when you get away from the location and the fraud stuff that's boring into this QoS area, which they would say the API basically supports the slice. That's how it's sort of provisioned. The problem I have, there's various problems I've got with it, but one of the problems I've got with it is there's not that many different categories that you can think of when it comes to sort of network features.
Yes,
that's one of the big problems I've got with it.
Like we always get the gaming low latency slice,
but it's not. But I think people try and make it sound like it's more that it's richer and that it's a bigger menu than there actually is. Because the way they do that is they throw the services in as an example. So they say things like robotic surgery and 5G enabled vehicles with like road junctions, even where some of the furniture's like linking to the cars and stuff, and then they'll come up with some other example about factory automation. But what does that mean from a network perspective? What are the actual features of the network that you're providing, or that you're enabling these applications to access?
Well, I mean, one obvious one with
I can only think of two or three.
Go on.
Well, there's the speed of connection, right?
Yeah.
The actual megabits per second that you're pushing down the
bandwidth.
pipe.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for years, operators have tried attach sales and marketing efforts to
more on that on our 6G segment as well.
Yeah. So I'm very skeptical about that anyway, because I think the whole thing about mobile moving up the generations over the last sort of 20 years has always been about pushing higher speed services, and yet ARPU's gone like that. So I'm very, very dubious that
basically
that's
in terms of the novelty and the utility of the higher bandwidth. It peaked with latter 4G.
Yeah.
And nothing very exciting has happened. We've got more spectrum. We've got more bandwidth, but no one.
So that's one of them.
Yeah.
Another one's gigabytes per month. If you want to, that's one thing you can sell. You can sell like metered, like you're going to get 60 gigabytes.
I don't see how you're
going to get that. But I'm just saying what the things are. The different ways you could sell the network, basically, and the different characteristics you can think of.
Yeah, you're laying the landscape.
The other one's latency. That's the one that people get quite excited about.
And that's with robotic surgery and autonomous vehicles and all that sort of stuff.
And then I guess the other one, which sort of ties all those together anyway, really, but maybe like reliability, like 5 nines and that sort of thing.
The not shit button.
They're not. Yeah, I mean, but the problem with the reliability one is it kind of ties all the other ones in anyway, doesn't it? It's like we'll guarantee that you get a 3 millisecond latency. service.
And you can see how, I don't know, for certain things like
emergency services is the big one, where they need a dedicated sort of slice that's never going to go. That's probably built into the SLAs that they get, I suspect, because T-Mobile US does it in the States. I think they do actually provide a static slice for first responders, they call them over there, don't they? And I guess there's an SLA in that where it's like higher than what they get if they were just using the public network.
Yeah, and that just brings me one thing. We are going to have our guest gate crash, and she said she's going to be here in 5 minutes. So I'm going to say. Well, I mean, obviously we don't want to draw this to a conclusion until she's literally here.
She might have views on this.
But one thing I want to say before she gets here, while it's at the front of my mind, is one thing I did get from it. So I generally share your skepticism about A, the use cases, and B, the methods of commercializing those use cases.
Yeah.
But the old AI was the elephant in the room. There were lots of jokes about let's see how long we can go before saying AI, and that sort of thing at the panels. And this Omdia thing later is going to be on AI. But what it's going to attempt to do, which I approve of, is not just bang on about AI in a utopian way, but try and think of immediate, practical, commercial applications. And one that occurred to me, someone spoke about AI sort of directly interacting with the network, interrogating networks, communicating with the network. And then another couple of times people spoke about the B2B2C channel. And just one vision where I'm starting to think, okay, I can see how this works. I certainly couldn't put a figure on it or even a likelihood of it. But the B2B2C channel, whereby, let's say, your main interaction with a network API and the billing process of utilizing this premium service is through another app, let's say a gaming app, or let's say a augmented reality app or whatever. And the commercial relationship is between the platform, the owners of the app, and the network. And then what the app does is when you're using the app, without even knowing it, you're actually experiencing a premium connectivity experience compared to when you're not using the app. So that's the B2B2C channel.
Right.
See what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Well, that's almost like Boyacom trying to explain their whole move for getting into APIs. It starts to sound... But you're trying to explain that to an average consumer.
But you're subscribing to the app. You're subscribing to Fortnite.
Yeah.
Or whatever, to trigger you. You're subscribing to Fortnite, and then part of your 10 quid a month subscription, which you don't even necessarily know, is that a quid of it is being given by Epic to operators to ensure this higher quality of service, low latency, whatever comms, premium comms stuff you need.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a solution looking for a problem, really.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the... So Colin Bannon, who's the CTO of BT Business, came out with a really... I thought it's a quote I'm using in the story I'm writing, but he's like, from here to Scotland's a few milliseconds.
Yeah.
Why is there a latency problem? Like, there's not this perception that there's an issue with latency and that we need to build out edge facilities and put GPUs in them and do this kind of stuff. There's no need for it in most countries.
But what about remote control? What about autonomous driving, where the difference of a few milliseconds can be quite critical?
Yeah, I mean, people are not convinced by those scenarios you just come out.
No, they're very futuristic.
No one in a country of the UK size thinks there's any kind of business case for building out edge facilities to sub-millisecond latency.
Right.
It's just not any services that anybody's...
Yeah, I was just trying to put the best argument forward in favour of it.
There's no sign of pent-up demand for this sub-millisecond latency. And the latency that you can already get on networks in Europe, where countries are quite small. If you've got a huge landmass, then there's, like the US, for instance, or Russia,
or China.
Then this idea of building out distributed compute. Now, who does that? I don't know. And whether it's an opportunity for telcos is another talking point. But yes, in that instance, you could see that there's what they call edge computing might be a thing. But I mean, Vodafone teamed up with AWS Wavelengths to do this sort of edge computing stuff, I remember, a couple of years ago. And I remember talking to Scott Petty, the CTO, about it at the time. And he's like, you never really need more than 6 at most data centres in the UK to do edge computing. And even then, that would be driving down like latency to a really low millisecond level, probably lower than you need it for most applications. So,
I mean, I completely agree that the low latency play has been a non-starter so far.
Yeah.
I'm trying to steel man their position, i.e., try and fully understand the most bullish argument in favour of it. But yes, I'm with you, even that.
And then this, I think one of the themes was this idea that, with some of these emerging techs, this is to get into your AI point, I suppose, that we need to find a better way of working with developers. This is the whole APIs thing. They want to find a better way of working with the developer community because developers have tended to work around connectivity rather than with it in the past.
Yeah.
I was chatting to Dean Bubley again, chatting to him at the break. He said, well, AI will actually make it even easier for developers to work around connectivity. It won't necessarily make it an avenue for, it won't open up an opportunity for there to be closer collaboration.
Well, there has to be a clear incentive. So via these APIs, telcos need to be offering something really irresistible.
Yeah.
And this is what we're really wrestling with, is we're still trying to get our head around what that fucking irresistible thing is.
This is the thing. What the API is, okay, let's get the location, the fraud stuff out there. That's actually quite useful. It's just very low revenue. It's not that exciting, but it's quite a useful thing to have. The stuff that they're getting really excited about, which is to do with like quality of service. As I say, I can't think of anything beyond a higher sort of megabits per second going down the pipe, or lower latency. And by the way, there's nothing about the technology, there's very little about the technology that supports lower latency anyway. It's all about building out new infrastructure to get those speeds down.
Oh, is it? So you're saying there's nothing intrinsic in 5G, even 5G SA?
5G SA does get it down a bit, but to actually make the real, I mean, this is why you
real
need to
difference
build
is
that.
just physical distance.
It's physical distance. You don't make a difference.
Which I first learnt from, what's his name, Marcus Weldon, about 10 years ago, funnily enough, at an Omdia event. Him just talking about the speed of light. And I was like, God, I'd never even thought of that.
Yeah.
But the speed of light does matter. But as you say, not so much in a small island.
So even if this sub-millisecond stuff is, let's play devil's advocate and say there's actually a really big demand for this kind of thing. Well, you've got to make a huge investment then to be able to do it. This is the whole AI RAN stuff. You know, put GPUs like out at sort of mast sites. I can understand why NVIDIA likes the idea of that. Because they can sell loads of GPUs, but
they're struggling to sell them.
These are not exactly cheap, as I understand it, these GPUs. So how much is the operator going to spend on this while its revenues are not growing, in the hope that someone's actually going to pay for access to a service that it's not really clear why you would need it anyway? You could probably just do this with these GPUs being hosted in a couple of big hyperscaler facilities.
It's tough, and I think, you know, that was just the vibe I was getting from the opening sessions that I wrote up. And then the 2 sessions that you and I sat in on before we slunk off to get drunk with Huawei, which was to do with cloud, sort of telco cloud stuff. Here we go. Hold on. So can you let her in? So we got our guest here. So we're going to interrupt the recording, get set up, and then we'll play it again. Okay. So like I said, I thought we were getting a guest, and she's turned up. The glamorous Ros Roseborough. Is that pronounced right? Is that more American way? If it was English, it would have like a GH on the end or something.
I think at one point in time it
right,
did.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
And Ros is our colleague at Omdia, who I've already said on the pod that I'm going to be, as soon as I finish this, I'm going to be chairing an Omdia event on AI, and you're the first speaker on it.
I am.
So and people might be able to tell from your accent that you're not from the UK.
I am not.
Where are you from exactly, Ros?
I live in the middle of the U.S. in Michigan, but I still kind of consider myself a Chicagoan.
Is that where you grew up?
30 years.
Right, cool.
Yeah.
And so you're just over here for this and presumably other things. In fact, one of which we're going to come to in a minute.
Are you White Sox or Cubs?
Cubs. Come on now.
There's only one football team, isn't there? There's only the Bears. Yeah. Ooh.
Sadly.
Don't get me started on the Bears, is it?
I've only been to one baseball game my entire life, and that was
it was
at
the Cubs?
Wrigley Field. Yeah.
Wrigley Field's the best. Even if
But that's really famous. Everyone's heard of Wrigley Field. It's quite old, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Well, for America.
By American
For
standards.
Who plays at Oakland?
Oakland has now moved to some
because that's the one I went to.
It's Las Vegas, isn't it? The Raiders. They've gone to Vegas.
Right, but the baseball team is now
Or is it the
playing
Rams
in
have moved,
Sacramento.
Okay.
The Rams as well.
Anyway, we don't have much time, so we're going to have to knock this tangent on the head.
We're not going to talk about baseball?
Afraid not, mate.
Oh.
Well, Rosa's time is precious. She's got. We've only got about half an hour or so of her time.
Yeah, so
So
I was here for FutureNet, essentially, too.
yeah, you're here for FutureNet, which we'll get onto in one second. Just one thing, just to frame you as a guest. You're an analyst, obviously.
Yep.
Do you have like a core beat, a core specialization?
Yes, my official title is Telco AI and Analytics.
Right. Okay.
And so it's in the domain of kind of what used to be called OSS/BSS.
Right.
But we don't use those old words
They're
anymore.
so passé.
Digital software, digital telecom IT.
So how long has AI? This is obviously relevant. How long has AI been like? Do you consider a core part of your remit?
Well, when I came back, when I joined Omdia a couple of years ago, it was the remit, but I joined in May of 22. ChatGPT hit November,
right,
and then the world went crazy. So what I thought was going to be a relatively, it'll be nice to add on.
So that is
to.
very relevant, and we will. This will overlap with talking about FutureNet, which we were talking about just before you arrived, anyway. But a big part of it, and a big part of this presentation that we're all doing later, is to me this sudden change in what AI means. We've been talking about AI forever. AI as a concept, we always joke whenever AI comes up, I'll always make some reference to the Terminator, so I might as well get that out of the way now.
Okay. Ting.
But that film was made in the 80s.
Yeah.
So, science fiction people have been talking about AI for a very long time. And I suppose, and I remember, I think this is also the 80s, I think when the first time a computer beat a chess grandmaster, everyone kind of freaked out.
That was an IBM one, wasn't it?
Yeah, Deep Blue or something like that.
Yep.
And he beat Gary Kasparov, although I reckon he got paid to throw the fight, but there we are.
Didn't they stick it on a quiz show as well? Watson sort of beat someone at a American quiz show, didn't they?
Yeah, and then someone beat someone at Go, which apparently has got a lot more parameters or whatever.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about it for ages, but around the time when you started in your present job was the time where all the conversation around it ramped and inflected and sort of changed.
Yeah, it was the whole Gen AI thing.
Yeah.
Because like you said, there had been AI before. That was kind of the predictive AI. And it's not really AI, by the way. It's really machine learning.
Yeah.
There's
Indeed.
nothing I would truly call AI right now, but that's a whole separate discussion.
Is that getting into the AGI type of
Oh, no.
discussion?
Thankfully not.
Oh, okay. But there's nothing that you'd even call AI sub-AGI?
No, it's still
Okay.
machine learning because it's still all based
Well, that's
on...
interesting.
It's all pattern recognition.
It's still based on patterns.
Yeah.
Right. To me, it will be truly AI if it can look at something, put it into context, figure out the importance of it without ever having seen it before. And
Yeah.
then being able to make a prediction based on that. That's when we
So
get
as opposed to what is sort of, I don't know, extrapolation on steroids or whatever.
If then.
Yeah.
Essentially.
It's like I always thought generative AI is just like a sort of glorified search engine, really.
And it's eating into search engine share. There was a thing this week.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
In fact, that's how you guys might know that I'm also a writing professor. And when I present ChatGPT to my writing students, I tell them to think about it as a Google on steroids.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were a writing professor. That's really interesting.
I did know that because I knew that's.
Now I feel self-conscious anytime I get her to read something I've written. She's going to mark it.
I use a green pen because that causes less stress.
Than the red pen.
They do studies on
Fair
these
enough.
things, Scott.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, red is panic.
Cool. Well, that's
purple and green work.
a really interesting.
What if you
extra
want
string
the
to your bow.
stress, though? This kid needs...
So, in fact, I know you sometimes listen to this pod. I don't know if you heard us sort of talk about. We did one quite recently. We were talking about AI as it affects writing.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, no.
Both in terms of plagiarism, but also in terms of sort of maybe possibly taking the place of creativity.
Exactly. Yes, I did listen to it, and while I was sitting there, I'm like, when I see them, I have to tell the story about how I present it to the students.
Right.
Because I will show them a ChatGPT something, and I go, "How did you feel when I read that?" And they're like, "Yeah, it was kind of dry. It was kind of boring because there's no heart."
Yeah.
You know. I said, you can use it to give you prompt some ideas for you, or to do some quick research. Who are the top 10 climate change scientists, and then you go to the library and actually look it up.
Yeah.
But to have ChatGPT write for you, I said you don't want them to write for you because it writes like crap.
Yeah. And the question which you'll know we posed on that pod is, can that ever change? I suppose to extrapolate where things are, and this is where a lot of the utopian talk comes, is like the rate of progress seems to have been so rapid. Although my understanding is that we're getting diminishing returns from the amount of GPUs we're chucking at it now.
Oh God, yeah, because it's running out of because they're running out of data.
Right.
And it's going to be self-referential pretty soon, and that's a bad thing.
That's a bad thing, yeah.
That's a bad thing.
Because after that comes self-aware and then
Oh,
Terminator.
now there's the AGI.
Self-aware.
Yeah.
Self-aware.
Self-aware.
Oh, he did not say
Well,
that.
no, but it's just going around in circles over the same old stuff, isn't it? I suppose.
Exactly. But when you said, I don't want a machine to write for me,
Yeah.
because they want us to start using, have you guys talked about our new AI system here?
Not that much.
We'll save that to after the pod.
I think we kind of plead the fifth on it, Rose.
Okay, that's fair, because I'm a little leery of it. But like you said, I don't want something else.
She said the thing.
I said the thing. You didn't warn me.
I mean, I'm pretty.
No, we're fine. We'll say it. It's just that we don't trust ourselves, especially a few beers in. We tend to just skirt around work stuff. Not that anyone's ever told us off, but we sort of think we can be gobby about everything, but we're slightly more cautious about being gobby about the person who pays our bills. That's all.
Right, the person
But
who
I'm
signs the checks.
I'm leery about all this stuff, to be honest.
More leery than perhaps you should, but
Probably, yeah.
I understand it,
Yeah.
especially as a creative person.
Yeah.
It can write a research report, it can write a play, it can write a poem, but they're really bad.
The only reason I'd want to use it, I think, is from a research perspective to see what, as a journalist, to see what it's like.
Sure.
And this is why I think we should sort of be able to access tools like OpenAI and play with them and sort of fiddle with them and see what's going
Yes.
on. But even then, I sort of worry about, well, I've used it once and then it's like Otter AI. I was actually resistant to using Otter AI for a long time, which is just a transcription tool, because I was thought I can actually I'm quite a quick typist. I can do it myself.
I don't use it.
But I've started using it, and it's like, I don't want to go
That's
down
one
that
I
avenue
do
with
use,
other
but I'm a
stuff.
very slow typist. I'm like two
Yeah.
index
Hacking?
fingers. Yeah. I haven't evolved beyond that. I was watching Teresa when I sat next to her at FutureNet doing touch typing and not even looking and just looking at the slides, and I was in awe of her.
Yeah.
But I've got no excuse. I could have bothered to learn. I didn't.
I was going to say, you made it this far and you still are.
I think I can type reasonably fast with just two fingers.
He's too old now to change.
Oh, I'm older than you. I can do it.
And anyway, sure.
There's websites like TouchType, and you can just learn.
I know. I'm lazy. I've got no excuse other than laziness.
5 minutes a day.
Fair.
So let's go on.
I was just going to say, because we were chatting about FutureNet.
Yeah,
but
that's what I was gonna do
nothing
anyway.
all that
I was gonna
specific
do that
to AI. I think we were sort of getting into AI stuff a bit. But did you have any? I mean, Scott sort of started off saying there's going over a lot of old ground. There's always this sort of, look what we know. Look at where telco is. We need to try and find new ways of spurring growth. Traffic growth slowing down, and
Yeah.
do we need to get rid of all-you-can-eat tariffs? And we've talked a bit about that. But
Okay, well that's good, because that actually did come up, and I was actually very heartened to hear. I think it was Bruno from Orange. I think that was him saying.
We were just talking about him.
Yeah. And he was saying, we cannot have it be a one size fits all. We have to have. The phrase I kept hearing was differentiated connectivity.
Yeah.
And I believe that's an Ericsson phrase, but I think a lot of people
Yeah,
are
they call it
using
programmable stuff, don't they?
The programmable.
Let's say differentiated connectivity.
I'm not making fun of our Swedish friends.
We can get away with that one.
Yeah, we can get that one.
That's
They're Northern European.
There are some
that's allowed.
accents you don't do. That's one that's okay.
that one's okay. But the idea of and they were talking about building the connectivity in with the application so you can get around all the net neutrality issues. And I'm like, well, good. At least the fact that anybody is thinking about breaking that or kind of getting the traffic to value equation back in sync. Ian and I have talked about this.
But it's great they're thinking about it. But where we kind of left it off before you arrived was like, it's a nice idea. But are you seeing, both from what you saw at FutureNet and from your day job, are you seeing any sign of that nice idea becoming reality?
But before you answer that, I think one thing we said was it was interesting they're talking about this at the time when a load of telcos are acknowledging that traffic growth slowed down and it's flattened off. It's like, well, if you're going to do it now, then maybe there's no upside anyway because of nobody's using it anymore. Yeah.
And that's the question is how, I think it was the woman from BT was saying that, they haven't seen any big influx.
Yeah.
Her, the one from
Gabriella and also Jeannie York, I think, said it as well.
They're not seeing the
we
big
noted
traffic
that the on both panels, the women were the most sceptical, which is interesting. Yeah, there we go.
Tend to be. That's usually what we do. But no, I think they were thinking about some of the right things. Have I seen evidence of people doing that yet? No. It's going to be a while before they do it. It's still, the whole AI for networks versus networks for AI, that whole thing. What
is that?
AI for networks is...
And the on-RAN and the and-RAN and the with-RAN and all that.
Right, okay. AI for networks means using AI to help manage, plan, build, maintain the network. That's the stuff I look at.
Yeah.
Which feels to me like an incremental step up from automation in the
Correct.
past.
It's part of the same.
Yeah.
It's part of the same thing. Networks for AI is what kind of things do we need to do to the network to support AI services?
Right.
The stuff that Brian Washburn's been doing with understanding the traffic flows and how those are going to change.
Right.
That's networks for AI.
And there was one interesting thing actually from those keynotes that they said there's quite a lot of traffic already is AI to AI. Like it doesn't involve human beings at all.
Oh yeah. They're hoping that the agent to agent stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be, but an agent, it's going to be such small volumes, or there could be like SMS, and each
it's not
one
like
of
they're
them is
exchanging
small.
video files or something.
No,
is
exactly,
it? Yeah.
exactly.
You got some AI agent watching episodes of Netflix,
Yeah, exactly. It's going. I think the latest Black Mirror is not as good as the original.
I mean, this is silly, isn't it? Some of this stuff, really. The agentic AI is the thing I'm struggling to kind of pin down and figure out what this is all about, and does it matter, and should we care? But
does it matter? Not yet. Should you care? Eventually.
yeah,
that eventually is the big.
Eventually.
That's doing a lot
Right.
of heavy lifting. That word, isn't it?
Right. Eventually. Yeah. No. I actually just I'm about a week or so away of publishing a report where I asked some questions about agentic.
right.
And what was interesting, I'll give a preview to your listeners.
Cool. Exclusive.
Was that agentic will hit in the customer care domain first,
Right.
which makes sense because that's where all the Gen AI is happening now. But it will ultimately have the most impact in network operations.
So is this taking people out and using, like when they talk about agentic AI would take responsibility for passing things to another agentic AI, and you don't have to have like manual processes in the loop.
Right. Basically,
It's just-
you tell it, it's all the intent-based stuff.
Right.
So you say, I want to, reprogram that router.
It's a new word for intent-based,
It's
in a way, with some AI sort of incorporated.
Yeah, it's intent. I mean, it's just like there's intent-based networking where you say, I need a connection between here and Paris. Go do it.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I need you to, configure this router and give me this much capacity, it figures out all those things and it knows where to find the information. That's what's different with agentic.
Right.
Because right now, like assistants can do like one very well-defined task. But agentic is more, I have a process I want to be completed. And you just say...
And it goes off and works it out how to do it itself.
Right, and it can call other tools. That's a lot of what you hear about. I don't know if you've heard about MCP.
No, what's that?
Anthropic just made it available. Model Context Protocol, I believe.
Oh.
But it is a way for... It's going to become the de facto standard for how agents talk to other systems. And Microsoft has said they're on board. OpenAI has said they're on board.
Right.
So once you have them, you're pretty set.
And it's important for telcos because it basically means they can take out even more cost and have fewer people.
Right. And
Even though they won't say, they'll go, well, we can use them for all these value-added tasks.
It's to augment all the humans.
Right.
But I will also tell you, I spoke with someone from a major operator who I won't name. And I said, are you really going to let agents do this for you? Then I did my skeptical analyst stance. That all sounds great. I said, but you guys are control freaks. And he said,
Totally.
no, he said, for certain things. And he gave me a figure of maybe 20%.
So it's that. Then you get that thin end of the wedge feeling, don't you? I mean, these are the same ones who, Ian and I have been calling this out for years to do with the public cloud about how much of their shit are they prepared to surrender to this third party, and this is like that on steroids.
It's very similar.
And it's the thin end of the wedge, and you can see it. In fact, I'm going to come up with an interesting little data point, which is one of the things I'm going to say in my intro for your talk in a bit. There was a IBM CEO survey this week.
Okay.
And so they spoke to a bunch of CEOs, and just one data point jumped out at me. I'm there to be the slightly skeptical sort of RC journalist. Over the past 3 years, this is straight from IBM, their survey, CEOs say only 25% of AI initiatives have delivered expected ROI, and only 16% have scaled enterprise-wide. And then a lot of this IBM thing's written very much in a similar analyst way, lots of recommendations, best practice, all that sort of thing. And what they're basically saying is, dip your toe in. Don't go all in. And, the other thing interesting from it is the thin end of the wedge point that what you just said made me think of is it's all very well them saying, we'll just get it to do this stuff that's mainly automated already, and they're just going to do that better. But you can just see it creeping up the stack, can't you?
That what you just said there, that is my biggest, I would say, I have to find the right word just how to describe it. But if all you're doing is doing what you've always done, but doing it faster, that's incremental. That is barely going to move the needle. But what I did hear some of the folks at FutureNet say, and I was happy to hear this, was, no, what we really need to do is completely rethink how we perform some of these processes, completely re-engineer them, taking advantage of what AI allows us to do. That's when you get the transformational change.
And how plausible is it for telcos to do that? Because this reminds me a bit of some other things, like where we talk about, like with Open RAN and Greenfield and Brownfield, and the problem with established, which is 95% of operators, is they've got all this legacy stuff. Right. Whereas what you seem to be talking about is kind of, to some extent, starting from scratch. I.e., everything now is built on the presumption that it's gonna have a lot of human interaction. Mm-hmm. Can we just alter those things so that a lot of that interaction is mechanized or automated or AI, or do we have to start from scratch and build something completely new?
I don't know that we have to, because what service providers have to do doesn't change, right? Yeah. So
provide service,
right? Configure the boxes, monitor the connections, support the customers. So at the macro level, it's all the same. But so you say start from the beginning, from how we could, like, if we didn't have a previous process, how would we ideally like to do it? But it just takes a lot of effort, and people don't always have time. The hackneyed analogy, we're changing the engine of a plane while it's flying.
Exactly.
The thing that worries me about it, though, is like the agentic AI is this idea of this intent-based thing where all these processes that someone would have been involved in before, now you've just got someone saying do this, and the thing does it. And then you take out a lot of manual effort, and I know they don't want to say this, but that will involve job losses.
Of course.
And so you don't train people to know that stuff anymore because there was no reason to. This is like basic grammar in school with ChatGPT. It's going down.
Right, and that's exactly. No, and also when people talk with code generation, that's been a big thing. They're concerned that if the machines write the code,
no one gets trained on code.
The kids don't learn. So when something goes wrong, nobody has any idea how to fix it.
So we reach a point at some point in the future where people don't. I mean, I already worry about this. This is not an AI thing. I just think people don't actually know enough about fundamental scientific concepts anymore. If you had to get electricity going again in the aftermath of some crisis, like not a lot of people understand basic sort of GCSE. Chemistry and physics really anymore.
Or like the electromagnetic spectrum.
And it's advanced so much in the last sort of 100, it's only been a relatively short amount of time, 150 years or whatever, that we've been doing this stuff. We're now at a point where we're talking about very, very sophisticated concepts that only a relatively small number of people understand anyway. And then an AI comes in and does that, and you don't really have anybody trained on it. You can really easily see where all this stuff starts to go into sort of Skynet territory.
It's like there's been a transfer of IQ from us to the machines. It's sucking.
There's a great book. There's a great book by Robert Harris is an author that I really like. He tends to write sort of more historical novels, but he did one called The Second Sleep. And you start reading it and you think he's set in the 1400s. There's a guy riding on horseback to visit a monastery. And then after about 30 pages, you realise it's not set in 1400. It's set in about 3000.
Okay, 2400.
Yeah, and they find this apocalypse happened to do with people's reliance on tech, and they find these strange rectangular objects that don't work anymore, like these slabs. And
that's a bit like some Egyptology.
But the whole as you read, you sort of learn why it happened, and there's like some great paragraphs in it about people became too reliant on these things they used to carry around with them. They couldn't think anymore. They couldn't retain information. It's 2020, I think. He wrote it during the pandemic.
It's like H.G. Wells in when did he write Time Machine? Because it's the rings.
1890s probably, I think it would have been.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells would have been.
And he already had the concept of like a device.
I know.
But wasn't Wall-E kind of the same thing too? Like we let it get so bad, and all we do is sit in our lounge chairs and press buttons for them to bring food, which is kind of my life. Because I have Grubhub Plus, and I'm like, I might never have to leave my house.
You have what Plus?
Grubhub.
Oh, Grubhub. That's like sort of
it's like
a
DoorDash.
Delivery thing. Yeah, DoorDash.
Yeah, totally.
But
DoorDash that's just bought Deliveroo in the UK.
Yeah, and Grubhub Plus comes with my Amazon Prime. They've got me.
But I'm the same,
I've got Amazon Prime, but I don't get a food delivery thing thrown in.
Really?
Maybe it's just come on Amazon.
Maybe it's just in the US.
In the US, they have a deal as well with Whole Foods with Amazon, if you have an account.
Well, they own Whole Foods.
Yeah, but here there's no deal. I don't know.
Okay, we're getting ripped off over here, Ros.
Sorry.
Do you want to have a word when you're back there?
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
Like changing the topic a bit, do you have any sort of view on because one of the other things they were talking about on those panels that had people like Gabriella and Jeannie York in them were the impact of AI on network traffic.
Yeah.
Is that something that, because people seem to be quite skeptical that it is actually going to boost access network traffic?
I think it's going to change traffic patterns.
Right.
But the thing is, right now, we don't know where the inferencing is going to take place. And that's what we're going to talk about that this afternoon, actually. That's what Brian Washburn on the enterprise team looks at network traffic. And he's got all sorts of network forecasts. But Karam has been looking at the networked edge. That's probably my phone.
That's mine, sorry.
Oh, it's Pierre. He looks at, where is it going to take? Is it going to be on the device? Is it going to be on the edge? Now, where that edge is, who knows? Or is it going to be in the hyperscaler's public cloud data center? If
you've got a slide on that.
I do. Oh, good.
Yeah, it's just the sort of thing you're talking about.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the answer is we don't know yet. So what we're trying to do is anticipate. If it, and I think he did scenarios, if it turns out that scenario A works, then you're going to have to get a whole lot more data center interconnect going. Or if it's really going to be on the handsets, then you don't need so much there because you're not going to send this stuff all the way. They don't want to send. You don't want to send all that information all the way to a public cloud to do inferencing when you can just do it on your phone.
Yeah. So, that begs a couple of questions to do with inference, and my understanding of inference is like a lot of the action, a lot of the money towards companies like NVIDIA has been to do with the training, where you need an enormous amount of compute power to just try and digest all the information in the world and put it into this sortable, accessible form, or put it into this large language model. And then inference is interrogating that large language model that has been trained to get useful shit out of it. I think that's a technical term, isn't it?
That's very technical.
And so the question about inference, which I definitely don't have an answer to, so I'm asking if you do, or I'm just posing the question in general, is how computationally intensive inference is and how timely it needs to be. And that's where you get into things like low latency and all
latency,
that.
Right. And that it depends, of course. I mean, if you're just doing a quick search, then it doesn't take very much, and you could just have it on the device. And they are talking about being able to, and I don't have you talked about this yet before either, is, we've talked about these large language models, the Anthropics and Gemini and all that, but they're talking about small language models that can run on a CPU, which means you can run them on a device.
Indeed.
And for most of what everyday people are going to do, probably enough horsepower.
And you've got people like Qualcomm desperate to sell chips that are really good at local inference.
So I can, I'm not an expert on this, but I can see obviously the hyperscaler case for doing inferencing, and I can see a lot of it happening on the device. The bit I'm a bit more dubious about, which is probably where the telcos obviously see some kind of opportunity, is the edge stuff.
The edge.
I don't really get why you would need much to be done there at all. This is why I'm very dubious about this whole AI RAN.
Right. It's an awful lot of cost for very little upside at the moment. That's Karam is the one. He and Remy spent a lot of time looking at that. That's one thing I'm happy about. I'll probably mention it this afternoon. When I started, I was essentially the only person in the telco team looking at AI, but now I've got so many more people. Camille's looking at it from a services standpoint. Brian's looking at the traffic. This whole the AI RAN Alliance. So there's a lot more people getting into it, which is helpful.
Yeah.
Basically, most of Karen's presentation is about edge. So you'll find that's the last bit of the thing that we're doing in a minute.
Yeah, and I don't see any sign really of anybody taking it very seriously, actually, apart from NVIDIA and SoftBank.
Well, but the service providers are desperate to find, as you have many, many, many times talked, they're trying to find something.
Yeah.
And is AI going to be the catalyst to make edge computing real?
Yeah. I mean, the problem I have with it is, I think Colin Bannon said this quite well. He's like, well, the distance from here to Scotland, it's like a few milliseconds of latency.
Exactly.
It's like you don't need this whole idea. I remember years ago when people first started talking about edge, it's like, well, we've got hundreds of sites up and down the country that could be used for edge computing. It's like, nobody's ever going to do that. You don't need it to be.
No. But when I was with Heavy Reading, I covered cloud infrastructure, and that was, in fact, I remember writing the report, how to turn the CO to DC. Turning a central office into data centers.
Yeah.
And were they going to do that? Because the service providers have, thousands thousands of
Sorry, we
these.
can whack our microphones.
Okay. We've got thousands of these locations. They're perfectly suited. No, they aren't, because they had completely different kinds of power, and the floors weren't, strong enough. But that was a different issue.
I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah, that was a thing about 10 years ago. They were talking about it. But it's true. For AI, the latency is not the transport latency; it's the latency within the model. And if it's running in a CPU on your phone, it's that you don't need anything more real time than that.
Yeah.
So there's I know we've only got about 15 minutes of your time left, Ros. I just want to pivot it back more generally to the show.
Okay.
Because we've kind of thrown a topic that we were already halfway into when you arrived. But I just wanted to give you the opportunity to take it from the top. You were there. Were you there for both days?
I was.
All right, so neither of us went yesterday, so maybe you can fill us in there. But have you got any other takeaways from the show on the whole? Any particular panels, overall themes, thoughts?
Yeah, the things I was happy to see them talking about data quality, because everybody knows, the output is only as good as the input. And
rubbish in, rubbish out. That's the
garbage
database
in,
thing.
garbage
Cleaning
out.
data stuff.
Cleaning. But no one really talked about how to do that. I was hoping a couple of the panels kind of hinted that they were going to talk about how service providers overcame it.
Yeah, I was just chatting to a colleague about this before we came in, because we were like, well, is the data cleaning stage something where you get loads of students to come in and sort your data out? So it's actually not very AI heavy at all, that bit of it.
AI to the rescue. No one, but there are vendors that talk about how AI can help you get your data ready for AI, which I think is a very self-serving kind of argument.
Yeah.
But some, people have done
If
it.
AI was so clever, you wouldn't have to polish it up, would you? You should just be able to deal with it.
And I will tell you this, that I told you I have a survey report that's going to be out soon. The number one barrier to more Gen AI in network and service management is a lack of confidence in the AI output,
Right.
which to me is very interesting.
And you got any thoughts of what the
why
reasons for that lack of confidence are?
Because they don't know how AI is coming up with these answers. So that's where you get to the whole
So it
visibility.
looks plausible, but it could be bollocks, and it's hard to tell.
Because it's a black box right now.
Yeah.
And so that's where you get to the whole explainable AI. And some of the vendors are starting to, and that's something I try to talk about with my recommendations. But until they get a better sense for why did it tell me to do XYZ, they're not going to do it.
Black box, because there's a limited number of companies actually doing the engines of this stuff.
That's true too.
And they're pretty confidential about how they do it, I'm guessing, because they don't want to share their IP. And
there's some models that are more open than others, like the Llama model. They made their they call it open weights, so you can see how those are done. But yeah, some of them are still.
Well, famously, the most closed is OpenAI.
But
it is.
Yeah.
Is it a more competitive market than I'm making it out to be on that side of things? Because I always feel everybody always talks about OpenAI, then I knew Llama, and then there's Anthropic, and they all seem to have their little public cloud owners and champions, don't they?
Yeah, the top two in our in my study I just did was Gemini and ChatGPT, and GPT-4.
Right.
4.5. And then it drops off dramatically.
Right.
But
do you know who runs our one? Elisa.
Yeah.
It's Anthropic, isn't it? I don't know how to say. I've read something.
We're allowed to say that.
Yeah, because the first
too late now.
No, the first question I asked it is what's the LLM behind you? And it was perfectly happy to tell me.
Oh yeah,
it didn't just say piss off, you nosy
but
bastard.
nobody's using it outside the company.
Yeah, they told us it was Anthropic.
What's Claude?
That's the Anthropic's thing.
Is the name of their model.
Yeah.
There's
Why the name?
Claude.
It's probably an acronym. Or maybe it's not.
I don't think it's an acronym.
Oh, right.
What else did I hear? Data quality. And so they are hoping I should say the link between AI and automation is as strong. There's plenty of reasons to use AI outside of automation, but perhaps because of this show, it was all about how do you get to level 4, level 5, and people are already sick of that too.
I thought it was quite funny the amount of times in the panels they made jokes about how they managed to go 5 minutes without saying AI.
But the level 4, level 5 stuff is very much connected with the use of things like agentic AI. That's what would enable you to move closer towards these sorts of networks that don't have anybody involved in running them.
Well, AI doesn't necessarily have to be agentic, because I think level 5 is basically.
What's level 5? That's nobody doing anything.
No, that's humans out of the loop.
Right.
4 is there's still a human in the. Yeah. like the whole dark.com.
So there's just a
Dark Knight, I heard
CEO
that.
drinking coffee.
Yeah, and there's these little agents running about.
Yeah, and then 1 or 2 human beings cleaning the bogs. And that's about it.
I think, but like I said,
That's my future, I think, probably.
I certainly hope not.
And the only reason they do that is because they're slightly cheaper than the fucking robot.
Surely the CI should be the CEO. The AI should be the CEO.
Yeah.
Well, I had a panel on that.
I saw
remember, we
that.
had one at Mobile World Congress.
I did see that.
The
and
agentic AI CEO. That was just suddenly, that concept was just thrown at me before doing it. I was thinking, hold on a sec. AI CEO.
But that's
I'm not happy about that
that's
at
the
all.
last stage of it all, really, isn't it? When you get rid of the CEO.
There has to be like a Black Mirror episode where the CEO comes down in his kitchen for breakfast and says hi to Alexa, and she goes, "Hi, Scott. Today you should fire 10% of your." Based on my analysis. Here's a list of names for you.
Is that one of the episodes?
No, it's true.
He's saying that'd be a good concept.
You should submit some
you
scripts.
didn't know if it was or not. No, automation is, I guess going back to the thing about doing what you've always done versus doing something new. I mean, automation really is just doing what you've always done faster. Like I said, that's just incremental gains. I am hopeful that perhaps next year we'll see more of, here's something we could not do before that we're able to do now.
That's really consistent. I don't know if you saw the write-up I did on the first morning. I wrote a story on it. It was I tend to turn them around quite quickly just to get them out of the way.
Yeah,
because we're going to the pub later. And I was just going, to distill mine down just to like 1 or 2 sentences. I was basically going, look, there were some great chats, but it all was a bit deja vu-ish. It was a bit. I don't think Open RAN's not in your space really, is it? But so I won't get into the weeds on it. But something Ian and I were just chatting about before. Open RAN came up, and this is something that the industry's been talking about for 5+ years. And again, just the theme of it was like it. It's like it had run out of momentum a little bit, but and all they were really saying is, look, it's going to come in quite handy. It's a bit future-proof. There's no real compelling business case for it now, but hang in there, it will come along. And then that's a similar thing like with network APIs and network exposure. Mm-hmm. Again, the compelling use case for it isn't there, but people like Ericsson are going, look, just keep the faith.
Well, they have to. They've spent $6 billion.
Yeah, well, they've obviously got the most direct investment in it.
Right.
Keep the faith, and in 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 or a million years, you'll be grateful you did. And we were talking as a complete tangent, but me and Teresa were talking about quantum just before. And then again, they were being a bit more supportive of it, and I was being more skeptical. And it was along the same grounds, which is, it sounds great, but the consistent thread with a lot of technologies that are either telecoms or telecoms adjacent is that they're very much future looking, and they're very few. You can't have guarantees, but very few sort of concrete assurances that your investment in this stuff now is going to yield ROI, not just this year, but in 5 or 10 years.
Oh, I was thinking, I'm glad you brought up ROI, because interestingly enough, in some of the qualitative research we did, we were asking people about how do they make the business case for AI? What are the KPIs, things like that. They're like, we don't have any.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? Oh, no, because we know that we're learning a lot and we're building a foundation.
You've got to do it because it's the big thing.
Because everybody else is doing it.
No, they're doing it because they know they have to eventually. And I asked,
a bit of FOMO, I guess.
There's some FOMO, yes, right, because if your competitors are able to harness it, then they can lower their cost base and be more competitive. But in my survey, I asked the question, I said, I forgot how I worded it, but something like, do you agree with the statement that in some cases it's okay to invest in AI when you don't, for non-financial benefits or intangible, in so many words? And more than half said yes. And I said, because you can then, come up to speed on the technology, because that's the last thing I'll say.
Yeah.
Maybe the last thing I say.
You be the judge.
Exactly. Alexandra will only be a little bit mad at me. And now, from that one little look, I forgot what I was going to say. I hate when that happens.
Well, you were talking about them investing in it, not just for financial reasons.
Yeah, your survey saying that they do it speculatively.
And learn about it.
Oh, yeah. Because, thank you. Just that little nudge. Because what did become clear is that the service providers want to make sure that they understand this technology. They know that it's going to happen. And if they completely outsource it, which they've done for the past, when you talk about, they've outsourced innovation in the telco market for the past 30 years, they want to do it themselves. We did ask the question, are you going to buy it or build it? But they really want those tools themselves to be able to have more control over it. And but what was interesting also was that they also said they need the most help with defining use cases.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's so backwards. You should be saying, hey, Google, hey, AWS, here's a problem. Can your new AI stuff help me?
Your supposed agentic AI.
Right. Show me how it's going to solve these problems I have. But instead they're saying, show me what I can do with your stuff. And
no, that is a really good point. And it's like cart before the horse type of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I wonder, and it reminds me, you should later on, I'll flag up this IBM thing to you, because if you hadn't heard of it, it might be, a lot of it was very general. It was like asking about everything. But just that one little point I thought was really interesting. And it was making recommendations similar to the ones that you were just alluding to, of like, have a clear idea of what your objective is, what you're trying to get out of it before you take the plunge. And it's kind of surprising to me. I've never been a CEO. I'm almost certainly never going to be a CEO.
You might be a CEO of Scott Bicena Limited.
Or I might just be an agentic CEO. Yeah. But I just sort of think, God, isn't that what CEOs should be doing? It's thinking strategically, having a 1 quarter, 1 year, 5 year plan, and then working backwards from that.
That's kind of what they teach us in MBA school.
Oh, you've done an MBA too?
Yes, sir.
God, you're so much more highly qualified than I am. I'm pleased I didn't know all this coming in. I would have just panicked at the gulf between us.
No, I love listening to when you talk about economics. I'm like, it's great.
Am I normally talking out my arse?
No, usually it's...
But you know that I'm
great.
completely winging it. It's not from a formal educational point of view.
Really? You do quite well then.
No, I was saying I know that you know that. But yeah, if you think for a dilettante that I wing it, okay, I'll settle for that.
Yeah.
Because I haven't bothered to do
You're not
an MBA.
embarrassing yourself, I'll put it that way.
That's good to know. Well, do you know, some other time, Rod, we've obviously all known each other for a while.
Yeah.
And we were chatting at FutureNet, and I was saying, I always thought it'd be great to have you on the pod, and it has been. But you're only able to have a small window because we got stuff to do. But do keep in touch when you're in the UK. You have an open invitation,
awesome.
And we can go off on some bigger tangents. We could maybe talk about economics or whatever.
Baseball.
Yeah,
or baseball.
Or where you get your amazing tops from.
A lady never tells.
Oh, right. Well, fair enough. So that seems like a natural inflection point. So I might let you go off and not get in trouble with Alex.
Yes.
And I'll be seeing you in about half an hour or so when we do this. And I think they're recording it. So if people listen to this pod, this pod's not going to be published till Monday. But if they're interested by everything we've just been talking about, presumably you could be able to go to the Omdia website or check it out on LinkedIn or whatever.
Yeah, they're going to
and it'll be published, and you'll be able to hear more of this.
Excellent. That was a lot of fun. I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot for coming on.
It's fun to be on this side of it.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, we'll have a little pause, Pierre, and we'll let Ros do her thing. Okay, so that's another break. We're getting so good at choreographing these improvised things. So it was great to see Ros. I'd definitely be great to have her for a full pod sometime in the future. So
She's a natural.
She's totally a natural, yeah. And I didn't fully appreciate, I think you know her a bit better than I do. I didn't appreciate quite how broad her areas of sort of expertise and interest are. So I reckon we could go off on all sorts of fun tangents if we get her for a whole pod.
Yeah.
And then if she's not done anything after, we'll get her to get pissed as well.
Yeah. Now I can get into even bigger trouble at home.
Ian's about to move house, everyone, and he keeps getting in trouble for not mucking in.
Not being helpful.
Not being helpful enough. I'm sure you are being helpful.
Well, I'm not really. I've done all the sort of paperwork side of things, but
not much heavy lifting. Well, that's not very manly of you.
No. Right.
Although, to be honest, your wife's in very good shape. She's very athletic.
Stronger than I am, I think.
Anyway, so we've only got about 20 minutes left because I've got to go and do this thing that we keep talking about. And so we've just got one more topic we're going to talk about that both Light Reading and Telecoms.com have written about this week. But I'll hand it to Ian first, as he's actually written it, whereas for us it was written by a colleague of mine, Mary.
Well, they're sort of related, aren't they?
They're related, but I'll let you...
It is on the same topic.
I'll let you get the ball rolling. So your story is called "The 6G, quote, golden band, close quote, is probably worth worthless in mobile. What's the 6G golden band, Ian?
So the golden band is we're talking about which spectrum you're going to use for supporting future mobile services, and it's quite noticeable that we've always stepped up basically as we've gone from one generation to another. You started off with sort of basic voice services, very much a sub-gigahertz thing. And obviously then that spectrum's being occupied, so you need to find somewhere else to go for your data stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason for doing it on we talk about this a bit, I think, on the podcast, but the properties of spectrum are such that in lower bands it tends to propagate very well.
Indeed.
It goes through building walls, it goes through foliage and all this stuff.
So it not only...
But there's less of it.
So it not only gets through objects better, but it's got longer range.
It's got long range and it gets through objects well, but there's not much of it. It's
so what you ideally want is something around a gigahertz or below, like 900, 800, 600
That's great
megahertz.
for doing voice, and it's just great for coverage.
And it would be great for data if there was more of it.
If there was more of it, it'd be great for data. But so you need to get the access to the bigger sort of the bigger pipes, if you like, to use that analogy.
Fatter pipes.
I know Dean doesn't like that,
Nah.
but to get the fatter pipes, you need to sort of go up the spectrum band.
Merely not because the spectrum has any qualities other than abundance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that allows you to get your kind of heavier data services. But the downside is it doesn't propagate as well. It doesn't go through walls as well. It can get interrupted by,
And it's
other
pretty much,
obstacles.
I'm sure it's a bit more complicated. It's pretty much linear. The higher the frequency, the shitter it is.
Yeah. And there's a trade-off.
Yeah.
But I think once you get up to a certain point, it starts to become fairly useless.
Silliness.
And we had this when 5G first got rolled out. There was quite a lot of interest in this millimeter wave band, which is sort of 26 gigahertz going all the way up to like 100 gigahertz, I think. And it's
People are already talking about terahertz and shit.
Well, I think so. This is the interesting thing. The terahertz conversation is almost dead now.
Which is 1,000 gigahertz.
And that is what people were talking about with 6G. They're having a conversation about doing terahertz type stuff, and I think partly because of what happened with millimeter wave. There was one company making a very big deal about millimeter wave a few years ago, which is very big company anyway on the telco stage. It's Verizon.
Yeah.
And
we used to take the piss out of them on the pod years ago where they'd make these base stations and we'd say you have to be sat on the base station because the propagation's so bad.
I remember talking to people like Bruno Jakobfeuerborn at Deutsche Telekom. When he was CTO there, and he was basing his sort of cost assumptions of what you'd need to spend if you were doing a sort of millimeter wave based deployment in the US. It's like 300 billion or something on rollout of a
because you need a base station on every corner.
Yeah, I mean it's it's just not very useful spectrum basically. And I think Verizon's strategy backfired. They got overtaken by T-Mobile. Started at the opposite end of the spectrum scale. Really, they sort of went for a low band rollout and then acquired Sprint, merged with Sprint, and got access to this kind of 2.5 gigahertz band, which has actually been really useful for them because it's more like the spectrum that people were using for kind of 3G type services. But there's even skepticism now about in the last few years, and this is really interesting. I think this mid band, as it gets called in Europe, and it's usually C band in the US, which is sort of 3.5 and around, has emerged as the kind of sweet spot for 5G. But there's all sorts of problems with 3.5 gigahertz spectrum. And this is one of the reasons why 5G isn't that good, I think, is because it just doesn't propagate that way. There's a guy called Craig Moffat, who's a very, very, very well-known telecom analyst, does research reports for his equity analyst company, Moffat Nathanson, and is, highly respected in the industry, especially in the US. And I remember him coming out with this research note last year when Verizon didn't have a very good earnings update, and there was sort of signs of the pressure that T-Mobile was putting on them. And he basically said one of the reasons for that wasn't to do with millimeter wave and the stuff they were originally doing. It was like 3.5 gigahertz spectrum isn't very good. It doesn't go, and people spent all this money on it in the US. They spent, I think Verizon alone, well, the operators basically, it was like those auctions that they had of C-band were over 100 billion they were raising. And it's just not that great spectrum.
Well, there just always seemed to be a bit of a gold rush for spectrum. With, this interesting thing, it was funny, Rod's being kind enough to say that when I'm winging it about economics, I wasn't too far off compared to someone who's obviously studied it properly like her. And I don't know, this is going to sound very self-justifying, but sometimes not knowing what you're talking about too much helps. Sometimes people say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, but sometimes a little knowledge can be handy. And what I always thought about with
I think you've probably got more knowledge than you think you have, though.
Well, but but less knowledge than people whose day job it is to go on about spectrum.
Yeah.
But thank you for saying so. And I just always thought if it gets shitter as you go up the frequency levels, and we know that much above, I don't know, 1800 or something megahertz, it starts to tail off, and even then.
Well, I think the 3G bands were good. That 2 gigahertz.
That was all right. Okay, but then once you get to about 3.5, we know they're worse, and yet there was this gold rush, as you say, and that was considered the premium bit. But as we just described, it was only premium because you could get about 50 megahertz of contiguous, which is the fatness of the pipe.
But the problem is you've got all these holes in coverage in countries, and you get Ericsson moaning about, people need to build out more. Well, of course they're going to make. It's like Nvidia trying to sell GPUs. Densify your network and put more sites in.
Yes, of course Ericsson's going to say
problem. Well, yeah, that really suits.
You've got to buy a shitload more radios
and stuff. Yeah. But basically, it's just it doesn't propagate as well. So. The reason I'm going on about this, the 6G story, is that the band now that they're talking about with 6G, where you were saying terahertz, well, they've given up on that. You talk to people who've been to these recent standards groups meetings that the 3GPP's organised in South Korea. There wasn't the whole terahertz thing has been sort of dropped.
I love this quote from your story from Kevin Holly, Industry Standards Director at BT. Quote, "The myth of terahertz seems to be put away at least until 7G." It's like, yeah. And then we'll kick it down the road till 8G.
Yeah. So he was one of the people at this event in, I can't remember the name of the city, Incheon or something in South Korea, where they had the big 3GPP bash. And a lot of the focus now is on this, what some people in the industry are calling this golden band. And it's actually, it's not really one band. It's like a big range.
Yeah.
Some of which is used for other things at the moment, but it goes roughly from sort of 7 gigahertz to 14 or 15 gigahertz, and that's what they're kind of talking about as where 6G could be deployed. In the meantime, there's a bit of discussion as well about getting access to this band that's sort of adjacent to that, this upper bit of the 6 gigahertz band, which I think there was an announcement on this week.
Yeah, so you're referring to the story that we wrote, which was written by Mary, where the headline was "European telcos demand whole upper 6 gigahertz band for 6G."
Yeah. And the problem with these bands is, we were just saying how 3.5 gigahertz even has problems, and you go inside a building and all of a sudden, if someone's using that spectrum to provide services, you're probably going to not get a very good signal. And, there's cell edge problems and all this sort of stuff. Well, you're going up that much more, obviously, to 6 gigahertz and 7 gigahertz. Even the lower end of that golden band and the stuff that they're talking about, that they're in a sort of battle to get from Wi-Fi, is really high, and it's just not very useful spectrum, I think, is one perspective in the industry.
Yeah,
that a lot of experts are sharing.
And I completely agree. I thought one little thing, I don't know if you mentioned it in your story, but you did mention T-Mobile US at one stage. And one thing that I found hilarious is they launched 5G with incredible coverage. And I was like, fucking hell, are they doing that?
Yeah.
Because they got hold of this really primo low frequency stuff that's 600 megahertz.
I did mention it because Earl Lum basically said
that was it. It was Earl Lum.
Yeah.
And everyone got pissed off because the problem was, for people who are listening, I'm sure most of the people who bother to listen this far into a telecoms pod probably already know this, but I'll explain it just in case. Basically, with spectrum, so we've spoken about how the frequencies have different, essentially, quality. And the lower the frequency, the higher the quality. But then you've got the fatness of the pipe, which is the analogy that basically describes how much contiguous spectrum you can use at once. And I think the minimum diameter of pipe tends to be 5 megahertz, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then if you can go 10, 20, 50, then
they want
you just get more bandwidth.
They want these like 100 megahertz channels back it up in the
and I suppose that's where sort of massive MIMO and that sort of thing comes in. And the thing is that T-Mobile US launched 5G on 600 megahertz, which is brilliant spectrum, but only 5 gigahertz of it.
Yeah.
And because, as we've chatted about on the pod before, but it's worth reiterating, there's nothing, to the best of my knowledge, or very little intrinsic to 5G, i.e. the waveform, i.e. the actual radio technology.
It's basically the same as 4G.
Yeah, that makes a beam that goes over 5G, when all things are equal, be any better in terms of capacity than a beam of 4G.
So the suspicion now, I think, what looks like is going to happen, Although we're still a way out, obviously, ahead of 6G standardization, and there is talk of getting another waveform technology in there. But I think most people are sort of saying it's probably going to be the same underlying waveform as 4G, and it's still sort of going to be an OFDM based technology as opposed to sort of introducing something new.
There's not like the equivalent of a move from copper to fibre, is there?
Yeah, and this is maybe something I need to the guys who are into the sort of rival technologies, and there's this. What is it? OTFS is the one that kind of gets orthogonal time frequency space. I think it stands for, as opposed to orthogonal frequency division multiplexing.
Very accessible terms.
But what would be interesting to know is whether that, if you did to put it in the same spectrum bands as 4G and 5G, would it make a big difference? You know. And if it didn't make a big difference, then why are we even talking about a new waveform, a new sort of area interface anyway? But so what you're doing is you're just basically pushing the capability of the technology up into higher spectrum bands. And then the trouble then that you get is the equipment that you're designing to work with this sort of 8 gigahertz stuff. Now, Erlum's a really good person to talk to about this because he's a really expert on the radio unit side, and he goes out and looks at all this stuff. He looks at the prototypes and got shown some stuff.
Yeah, and he's the guy who had that scoop to do with the fans.
Yeah,
and all
so he got shown around some stuff that people, I can't mention the names of companies, but he got shown some stuff like Mobile World Congress, and he was like, I chatted to him really recently about this, he was like, it's huge and really heavy. Like, if you're rolling that out, you know, it's costly.
Well, there's a clue in the name Massive MIMO.
Massive MIMO. It's just like the Massive MIMO at the moment is going up to sort of 64 transmitters and receivers in these sort of units. Are you pushing it up to kind of 128,
each of those has a weight.
256
and a cost
in these things? And there's these huge units, and they're so you've got to reinforce your masts. You've got like all sorts of problems with wind, you know, and things like that. You've got to wear like natural sort of elements basically, and the power is like
through the roof.
Huge. And the range is like obviously because of this going. So
you got these diminishing returns. You got these extra costs,
returns,
both directly and indirectly, and these diminishing returns from the shitty spectrum.
So here's the irony of all this. You had that statement out, the 6 gigahertz. We need to get access to the upper 6 gigahertz band. Meanwhile, earlier on in the year, they're going, we want it to be software based. We don't want to spend a lot of money. We don't want to roll out loads of new hardware.
Well, that's just what I was going to ask you, Ian, and we're getting close to having to wrap up, sadly. So these are 11 major European telcos, all the ones,
traffic growth plateauing.
Yeah, and traffic growth plateauing, which as we agree, you know, which regular guest William Webb's been banging around for years, and now everyone else is finally going, yeah, you might be onto something there. So all the big European telcos, and 11 of them, why do you think they're all begging for this shitty spectrum?
I mean, so the two people I've asked about this are William Webb and Dean Bubley, and they sort of came out with the same answer, but in a slightly different way. I think I quoted William Webb in my story that I wrote saying it's the same old playbook. They basically just
haven't got any other ideas.
They just haven't got any ideas. So they always approach this. They're always saying it's like a customary thing to say that you need more spectrum. And then Dean basically said the same thing. He said, look, the guys who are putting this stuff out and pushing for this are the guys who work on the spectrum side of the business.
It's their job.
It's their job. It's like if you talk to guys who are involved in dealing with spectrum and pushing for access to spectrum, they're obviously not going to say there's a different way of approaching the problem. But I wonder if all these signatories on this, all the CTOs, if you actually went and talked to them in private, I wonder how many of them would say to you, well, really, we don't want to be building 6 gigahertz.
So you seem to be saying,
equipment.
and to paraphrase William and Dean, you seem to be saying that they've just got to seem to be doing something.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a bit gratuitous.
Yeah.
And you just said something, I don't know if I've misheard the context, but you said a way of solving the problem. What is the problem?
There isn't. This is the thing. There's not really a problem. At the time when we're talking about data growth slowing down, tapering off, and these big capacity constraints, if we have William on now, he'd go, like 5G solved the connectivity problem. What you really need to be doing is talking about integrating Wi-Fi and doing like coverage in areas.
Right,
so that's his whole thing.
Ubiquitous connectivity.
That's what the focus should be. Not talking about rolling out 7 gigahertz massive MIMO units.
It just does seem, you know, we were talking.
I mean, this is the vendors pushing this to some extent, obviously, clearly, this sort of messaging. But I know that's come from the operators. But it's the same guys. It's like the other side of the coin, isn't it? And the operator community that's backed things like this. And the GSMA straddles both camps, doesn't it?
I never read the source letter, even though it went up on the.
It didn't come out of the GSMA.
I can't remember, but I would love to know if in the source letter they said, if you give us all this spectrum, here's what we'll do with it.
Yeah, well, someone needs to take that story, that thing that they just put out, and give it a good kicking. And I think I might do it early next week.
That's true. That's one. Back to, for people who regularly like reading, compare Ian's early week output with what we chat about on the pod, and you'll often see a bit of overlap, which makes total sense because you write news analysis, and one of the benefits of conversations like this is it helps you marshal your thoughts. And,
totally.
And come up with angles and ideas. But I would love it if they went, if you give us all this spectrum, then ... because I can't see what the then ... is.
So here's the other thing: this notion of there being like a spectrum crunch, and the idea that traffic growth slowing down isn't really very supportive of that anyway.
Yeah.
But it's not just people like William Webb who tracks that who was saying this to me. So Earl Lum, who looks into this stuff almost like as a religion, he was saying there's so much badly used or unused spectrum that's been awarded in some countries. He was looking at he goes into Google Maps and goes and sees where masts have been installed, and then finds out the details on them.
Wow.
And then looks in. He really investigates this stuff pretty thoroughly. But he was saying a company like A1, that's Telecom Austria basically, they've got loads of spectrum that doesn't appear to be getting used very efficiently.
So, I mean, and don't worry, Pierre, I'm going to wrap up soon. I was waiting for him to start doing throat-cutting gestures. And
he loves all the technical stuff.
No, he's also got a meeting in about 5 minutes.
Oh.
I guess going full circle, and this is a good chance to wrap it up, although I'll give you the opportunity to give your thoughts. We spent most of the pod chatting about FutureNet. And my initial take from the morning keynotes was that there's some great chats, but it does feel like we're going over the same old ground, and that we're still groping around looking for, I'm not going to use, I'll use it now in order to say I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to use words like killer app or killer user, or anything starting with killer. That's very hackneyed. But anything where we say, if you invest in this, there's a clear business case for doing so. It's all very speculative. It's all very future-proofing. We didn't get a chance to talk as much about the Open RAN side of it as we were just beforehand, Ian. But, a lot of the stuff in the panel at FutureNet that I heard to do with Open RAN just seemed to amount to future-proofing rather than any immediate compelling utility for it right now.
Another topic with 6G is that 6G is a massive problem for Open RAN.
Why is that?
Because with these more advanced massive MIMO radio units, everything needs to be even more integrated than
right. So that's one thing.
This is a topic for a future pod.
It is. So, but I'll summarise it quickly. What we were talking about before, and I was bouncing some ideas off Ian, and he was helping me clarify them. But basically, I was thinking, isn't Open RAN just about creating universal connectivity like we did on motherboards in PCs 20 years ago with USB? And the short answer is yes and no. But there seems to be, the consensus seems to be there'll never be quite the plug and play thing that you can have now, where you can buy a motherboard and stick an NVIDIA graphics card or an AMD one or Samsung RAM or someone else RAM. It's never going to be quite as plug and play as that. And I was thinking, well, if it's not going to be plug and play, and there's still going to be, as you told me, Ian, a hell of a lot of system integrator need to reconcile these different components, then I'm struggling to see the point of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good way to look at it, I think.
Yeah, and I'm sure there is a point, and as you say, we haven't done that topic justice because we're out of time. But that is an interesting thing, and just to wrap up, and then I'll give you the last word from FutureNet. That was it. Whether it was AI, whether it was network exposure / APIs, whether it was Open RAN, or even whether it was the cloudy stuff that I sort of half paid attention to because it's after lunch, and I was catching up on my emails.
We didn't talk about any of that.
No, I know. Well, we ran out of time. It was there was lots of worthy talk. I thought it was a good event. I'm not dissing the event at all, but a lot of it was, I just thought, very abstract, very speculative, very wishful thinking, and not very much concrete. We're going in this direction because it makes sense, and there's revenue, and there's ROI, and that sort of thing. last word for you, mate.
Well, I agree. I know we need to finish. So,
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
no, I think it sums it up pretty well.
All right, cool. Nice one. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there. Just a reminder, if you're interested in this Omdia thing that we're going to go off and do now, they'll probably publish that next week at some stage. And we're going to do 2 pods next week. I won't say who the guests are, but someone came in at the last minute who's only available on Wednesday, so we're going to do a double effort. So make sure you join us for those, and I hope you enjoyed this one.